Welcome, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to Issues Briefing 2022. The League of Women Voters of Illinois is thrilled to have you all here. My name is Allison Hout, and it is my honor to serve as the president of the League of Women Voters of Illinois. This is always an energizing moment, gathering together to take part in the League of Women Voters of Illinois' annual exploration of the many issues of the day. This week, our assembly of experts will help us acquire the information, develop the understanding to discern critical needs, to decide what matters most to us, and become advocates for change. Not only can we choose to advocate with the power of our knowledge and understanding, but we can take that learning back to our communities. And in our communities, we can engage, we can educate, and we can activate others. And with that civic engagement comes voting, more voting. There are many, many ways that our voices can be heard, and we must make sure that we use all of these opportunities. So today, I encourage you to listen actively, ask questions, and when the week is over, I encourage you to engage. Contact your local elected representatives. They are only an email or a phone call away. Let your representatives know what matters most to you, what is important to you, and why, and ask for their support for solutions. And then keep it up. Do it again. Become a familiar face. Advocate for change. Before we begin, I want to remind you of a few things. Our meeting today is being recorded. Our speakers and interpreters will be highlighted, spotlighted for you. And if you use speaker view in the upper right-hand corner, you will be able to get that best view. Subtitles have been enabled today. If you would like to activate, enlarge, or end the subtitles, go to the bar at the bottom of your screen. Toward the end of each session, we will have a question and answer period. You may put your questions directly into the chat and put them as a direct message to question asker. League members will be posing the questions to the speakers at the end of the presentation. Please join me in welcoming our American Sign Language interpreters for today, Vera Marie Baldoza and Molly Burke. And finally, thank you to our League of Women Voters of Illinois Board of Directors, the League of Women Voters of Illinois Issues and Advocacy Committee, and everyone who has been a part of helping bring together this fantastic week of education and activation. Let's get ourselves going. Jean Pierce, co-chair of Issues and Advocacy Committee, will introduce our speakers.
Good morning. Welcome to the 2022 LWVIL Issues Briefing. Our first plenary session is titled, How to Make Your Voice Heard. Our speakers will be sharing a number of suggestions for how to advocate and lobby effectively at the local, state, and national levels. Our first speaker is Bill Scown, member of the Central Kane County League, who will tell us about his experience advocating with community leaders for the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act.
Good morning, folks. So I'm going to talk about my experience lobbying with our local legislators to support CEJA, which is the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act passed last year. A bit of history first. I really wasn't new to this issue of clean energy. About 9 years ago, a number of us banded together in the Geneva and Batavia area to lobby for divesting from our local muni utility investments in the Prairie State Energy Campus, which is a humongous coal-fired mine and electricity generation station in southern Illinois. Geneva is one of many Illinois communities and communities outside of Illinois that made investments in this coal plant, which turned out to be a very uneconomic and unfortunate event. It took this Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, CEJA, the one I will be talking about, that was passed last year, to put Illinois on the path to clean energy and close the fossil fuel generating plants in Illinois by 2050. Geneva and Batavia, again, are just one of the hundreds of communities across the Midwest that are invested in this dirty coal plant. And there are also large investments in gas plants for these muni utilities that are owned by us and paid for with our utility fees. We in Geneva and Batavia have influential state and local reps whose support was key to getting this legislation passed, and whose future support is going to be key to actually seeing the legislation implemented. So I'm going to go through a few lessons that I think we learned going through this experience last year, and just to kind of manage expectations. There's no rocket science here. It's really stuff that is common sense, but it really confirms kind of what works. The first lesson is you need to pick your battles carefully. Look for something that's both meaningful and doable. You don't want to waste your time on stuff that doesn't matter, greenwash stuff, for instance, in the case of clean energy. But you also want to pick things that are achievable. So Bill Koehl, who will be talking after me, really led me to this. And Bill started working before I did with CJA and the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition, which was the primary group bringing this and shaping this bill for the Illinois legislature. The ICJC effort on clean energy dates back to 2018 and possibly earlier. By 2020, when I got involved, they were a very well organized and diverse effort with the election of Governor Pritzker and a democratically controlled legislature, there was a chance of success to get this bill passed. So it looked like a key climate battle that could be won, and I signed on. The coalition was really broad. It included hundreds of environmental advocacy organizations, businesses, community leaders, consumer advocates, environmental justice groups, and they went through a very elaborate and drawn out process to get a really well-balanced bill that could garner enough support across all of these constituencies to get passed. So my opportunity was to help the coalition secure the votes of our local Geneva, Batavia state legislators. So lesson number 2 was you need to build relationships ahead with capable partners if you're going to get stuff done. So in the case of this situation, that included our city council and mayor, our county board, our state legislators, our local issue groups like the Sierra Club, for instance, Kane County Democrats, and church groups. So because I had some connections and history with all of those groups, I was able to use their social networks to reach out to people that would be likely supporters for a clean energy bill. Bill Koehl, Gene, and I are members of the Unitarian Church in Geneva, which has a very active social justice environmental group. And through the UUSG folks, I've been associated with the Fox River Valley Initiative, which is a group of church-based activists working on mental health and affordable housing and gun safety and other community sort of issues. And then through Gene, Gene brought me to the league and another set of connections. Jeannie, my wife, has been very active with the local Democratic Party and supporting national, county, and state campaigns. So all of these were local networks that I participated in prior to coming to this issue, and that I was able to tap into for support. Those communication networks, those advocacy networks are critical. You can't create that stuff when you decide to engage on an issue. You have to have it before. You have to have it waiting. Lesson 3 is you really need to have a positive relation with your local state representatives and county and city council people. Because, I've been active, especially with Jeannie, in local politics. We have a mostly positive relationship with our local reps. And that helped us get in the door and have an open relationship with them where they talk to us about their concerns and thoughts about this particular piece of legislation. And, the concerns were significant. We were quite fortunate in that, as I was saying, we had people who were already predisposed to supporting clean energy and strongly in favor of doing this. However, there were significant concerns on their part. The prospect of an early closing of the coal plant and potential write-down of a big investment in this coal-fired generation, of course, was going to meet significant local resistance, political risk, lots of concerns over the cost and feasibility of such a transition, and some dug-in opposition, especially in our local community municipal utility managements. Those people come from a background of coal-fired, gas-fired generation, and they've got something that they recommended and they implemented in the past. Likewise, we had people within our city councils that voted for making the investment. They felt significant political risk if they turned around and took a different tack. So there was significant risk for our state reps and potential opposition for them to do the right thing. Kind of our next lesson learned was you need to ask the experts on how to do it. And fortunately, the Clean Jobs Coalition had some really experienced lobbyists. Steve, who is with us today, being one of them, but also people like Jack Darren from the Sierra Club, J.C. Kibbe from the NRDC, Colleen Smith from the Illinois Environmental Council. These people have been working on this and other similar issues and really know their way around the political lobbying world. So we went to them and they helped us identify the decision makers that we needed to enlist and who could be enlisted. And they coached us on how to talk to them and how to be effective with them. They were able to connect us to resources that we could use to educate and convince our representatives that this could really be done. It was going to be economical. It was actually going to save cost in the long run, be cheaper than sticking with expensive, dirty coal. And it was going to be feasible. There would be enough capacity and resilience to make it reliable as well as affordable. So they connected us with Kevin Brem as I think, a key example from the Rocky Mountain Institute, who the Rocky Mountain Institute does a lot of technical analysis, consulting on clean energy and renewable energy. And we brought in Kevin to talk to our city council and other community organizations we were trying to enlist in the effort to show them that this was really possible. This was really a good idea, both economically as well as for the environment. But I think the key advice they gave us, though, in addition to giving us some help with education, was that we needed to keep our appeal emotional and simple. And I think both Bill and I have a tendency to dive into the details. We want to talk to you about all of the costs. We want to talk to you about all of the technology involved and how the world is changing there. But the emotional appeals, the idea that this is critical for us and our children, that's really what moves people. That's really what develops the support. The fourth lesson is You got to get out there. You got to turn out the local constituents and the local support for your issue. To get the support of our state reps, we had to show them that they could do the right thing and their voters would be there to support them. So most of what we did was we called, we sent emails, we met with our local voters to educate them and ask them to call, to write, to show up at meetings, and to be visible. We, there's nothing that works better than a lot of letters, phone calls, and faces at meetings to show your representatives that they've got the support. People have got their backs. Our elected officials needed to feel the love. They needed to feel safe taking a position for the change. One of the most effective tactics on our local campaign was a fundraiser for kind of the local Western suburban state reps that was organized by the Sierra Club and the Illinois Environmental Council for those reps and senators supporting CEJA. Nothing says love like money. And the last lesson is don't quit. This stuff takes time. It takes a long time. The fight against climate change has been going on for decades now. The fight to take fossil fuels out of power generation in the US has been going on since the Clean Air Act of the 70s. It's always, 2 steps forward, hopefully only 1 step back, and sometimes it's 3 steps back. But the reactionary support for dirty energy and the status quo and investments in this stuff isn't going to roll over easily at all. And it's going to take decades to see this CEJA roadmap and other environmental roadmaps implemented. We're going to have to continue to fight because there's going to be resistance to actually carrying out whatever legislation you can get passed at every turn. So this is a real marathon, and we've got to hang in there for a long time to make it happen.
Thank you, Bill. Next, climate change issue specialist Bill Koehl will share his experiences working with a coalition at the state level.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you, Bill. That was an excellent presentation. I was glad I was here for that. Good morning, everyone. And I want to thank everyone for taking the time to be here today and taking time to listen to my story. I hope you'll find it worthwhile. My story is about being an observer for the League at the climate table as they were writing the Clean Energy Jobs Act that Bill just spoke so eloquently about. As an observer, I was able to sit in on and watch the meetings as they happened. This is a story about what I saw and what we did. And what we did was help Greg Hubert's passion to close Prairie State coal plant come alive. So this is the elusive prospect of keeping Prairie State in CEJA. One of CEJA's pillars was to close all of the fossil fuel plants by 2030. The goal was to insist that there be a date certain for all plant closings, and to be sure that included Prairie State. It's the largest, newest, worst polluting coal plant in Illinois. There was an earlier energy bill back in 2016 called the Future Energy Jobs Act, called FEJA. But in FEJA, all the municipal utilities, including Prairie State, were exempt. There's a rule that says the ICC, which governs private utilities, does not have jurisdiction over muni co-ops, or as the muni co-ops frequently note on their public communications, we are not regulated by the ICC. Outside of a new overarching state law, Prairie State is untouchable. So on with the story. There's almost a dozen different working groups covering all the aspects of CEJA. One of particular interest to me was called decarbonization, DECARB for short. This is the group writing the provisions to close power plants. Mr. Hubert was a participant of the DECARB group. You might remember him. He spoke here last year. I asked how the project was going with regards to Prairie State. He is not optimistic. In fact, he was planning to quit the climate table outright. This was very discouraging. Nobody, not directly employed in Prairie State, knows more about Prairie State than Mr. Hubert. At the next DECARB meeting, I asked, is Prairie State included when we say closing all fossil fuel plants in 2030? I was looked at with dismay and told, well, yes, of course. Nonetheless, Mr. Hubert left the climate table and he joined the Downstate Caucus. There are many communities in central and southern Illinois that are cooperative utilities, and they are owners of Prairie State. And Mr. Hubert hoped that they would be more receptive to his story. The Downstate Caucus is a large coalition of organizations. They also have a seat at the climate table and get to contribute a member to the steering committee. It is the steering committee that guides the efforts of all these working groups, brings them into a cohesive whole, and plans the grand strategy. I followed Mr. Hubert to the Downstate Caucus. We all joined the Downstate Caucus. The League of Women Voters is a member of the Downstate Caucus. It just makes me happy to say that. This is awesome. We found that place too. Here, I got to see it firsthand what he was talking about when he said Prairie State's not getting the proper level of concern. A couple of weeks went by and they never brought up Prairie State as a topic of discussion. It was always there, just out of reach, sitting at the bottom of the agenda. I watched one day as he politely pleaded the Prairie State question be moved further up the agenda. He was told not to worry, that it was number 8. They would get to it soon as they could, but they were already very busy. That moment of silence followed, waiting for further comment. And all at once, it became crystal clear exactly what he'd been talking about, what had happened at the climate table, what was now happening at the Downstate Caucus. They were either vastly underestimating Prairie State or afraid of it, and I did not know which. But by now, I knew most of the actors on this stage and what their roles were. And I know the big players who could take this on and make this a thing were distracted or overworked or knew more about this than me and suspected it's a real can of worms and really did not want to open this one. Moving Prairie State up the agenda was fraught with peril. What seemed like another 10 seconds of silence went by as they prepared for the next item. I contemplated my role as an observer for the League of Women Voters, and I was wondering, should I say something? I'm not an academic or a professional, just a concerned citizen. Who am I to speak up? Well, I didn't have time to figure it out, and I felt compelled to seize the moment, and I said, I think we should listen to what Mr. Hubert has to say. I think it's important. That's all. That's what I did. I had to add, I think it's important as if to justify. Why was I blurting into this conversation? That was followed by another moment of silence. I think I got a raised eyebrow and the moderator made a note. There was no second. No one else spoke in support. The meeting moved on without further comment. I thought we were sunk. Another 20 minutes, the meeting wrapping up, there was a voice from the back of the room. What's up with that Prairie State thing? What's that all about? That was Mr. Norris from Alton, Illinois. Mr. Norris was also here last year as one of our speakers. He was also the Downstate Caucus's representative on the steering committee of the climate table. They listened to Mr. Norris. As I remember it, our note taker said, all right, we'll do Prairie State. The tide had turned in favor of taking up the discussion. Mr. Hubert gave his presentation on the serious, disturbing, and elusive nature of that coal plant, 12 million tons of CO2 every year, 1 premature death from air pollution every 5 days, an ownership structure that spreads across 8 states and 200 communities, and it was slated to run for another 50 years. The plant had to be closed by CEJA, or it would never close. Collectively, everyone's hair caught fire. I heard the phrase, oh my God, this has got to go back to the climate table. The next month, Mr. Hubert gave his presentation on Prairie State to the whole of the climate table. Appropriate enough, their hair caught fire too. As he finished up, I could hear people in the background speaking, we have to do something about Prairie State. This has to be in the bill. There grew an insistence that the provision to close Prairie State not only stay in the climate bill, but become one of the main focuses of the climate bill. The media folks came up with a phrase, no climate, no bill, which meant specifically, we must close Prairie State. The steering committee was not happy. Turns out they had very good reasons for fear. There's fierce opposition to this idea of ever closing Prairie State from utilities, the industries, and especially the unions. At this point, this 1,000-page bill, easily representing 10,000 hours of work, and not least of all, many other provisions besides closing Prairie State. This was to become a nation-leading equity climate bill, and it was all at stake. And when the bill went up for a vote, it failed. It failed because of Prairie State. It failed because we would not pass a bill without Prairie State. It failed at 11:45 p.m. on the last day of the spring session. It failed 2 days later in the middle of June, 2 weeks later in the middle of June at a regular special session, and it failed again one last time, one last effort in the middle of July. So that was the story. In conclusion, you would think, what happens? Well, we did finally pass the bill. It did turn around. Actually, there's like a whole missing piece there. I don't know what happened, but in September at the veto session, it did pass. Maybe Mr. Andersson can fill in some blanks in my story. What went on? But the bill did finally succeed during the veto session with Prairie State closing date, and we did in fact bell the cat. But if fossil fuel interests had failed to protect the plant outright, they did manage a major compromise. It's not set to close in 2030. It does not even have a hard close date until 2045. That's when the brand new natural gas power plants also close. That was another compromise. Fossil fuel interests have succeeded once again in delaying a needed response to climate change, but not forever. So the fight's not over. There's still plenty of work for the league members to do. But because of the league, I was there at the moment. No one wanted to talk about Prairie State. I got to use my voice. I highly recommend anyone who might be thinking of signing on to be a league observer to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. Now we're going to hear from former state representative Steve Andersson. Currently, he's a lobbyist, and he was indeed working very hard on CJA. He's also going to tell us how to talk with people who don't agree with us at the local, state, and national levels.
Thank you, everyone. Good morning. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. So my quick story is I was a state representative for a period of time, was a human rights commissioner for a period of time under Governor Pritzker, and then I decided that advocacy is more where my passion lies. So I returned to the legislature, but this time in the form of a lobbyist. And I'm very proud to be able to work for what I call do-gooders. And what that really means is the groups that are typically not-for-profits with a public benefit. So things like the Clean Jobs Coalition and the Energy Foundation. Those are representative of the types of clients that I get to work with. And that nothing gives me greater pleasure than to be able to fight for the good guys. So the topic today is one of how to communicate with your legislator. And I'm not talking about how a lobbyist does it, because that's a professional thing. And I think we're talking more in terms of grassroots. You know, how do you talk to your legislator? How do you communicate what you believe is important? And I think it is important to distinguish between state level communication and federal. And the next speaker will talk about the feds. So I'm just going to tell you that they are very different. They are very different because of the natural difference between something that's local and something at the federal level. Our state reps each represent about 108,000 people. Representatives in Congress, I think, Hilary can probably correct me, but I think it's like 750,000 people. So quite a bit more. And the thing I'd like to start with is I want to tell you what doesn't pass bills. Not what does, but what doesn't pass bills. Good data doesn't pass bills. Logic definitely doesn't pass bills. Reason doesn't pass bills. I know you're thinking, great, what does pass bills? Well, Bill earlier mentioned it. Stories pass bills. Emotions pass bills. Data, logic, and reason back up good bills, but they don't pass them. The thing that's most important when you're trying to work on any subject, not just clean energy, any subject in the world that you have a passion for, is that you tell your story about why it's important. Human beings are by their very nature storytellers. That's what we've done our entire evolved existence. That's what we did around the fires back long before there was farming and civilization. We told stories. That's how we talk to each other. That's how we learn. Teachers will tell you that the best educators are the ones who tell tales and their students listen. It's no different with legislators. They want to hear stories as well. So So that's the first point of my points is tell your story. And if it's hard, that's okay. If it's a good story, a positive story or a sad story, that's okay. But tell it and be genuine and be yourself. You don't have to be practiced. You don't have to appear professional. You're a constituent. It's their job to listen to you. So whichever way, and we'll talk about different strategies about how to get connected with your legislator, but whatever it is, when you do that, remember, it's your time, they work for you, and it's your story to tell. So I can't emphasize that enough. When I was a legislator, I would typically meet, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 people a day individually, whether I was in Springfield or whether I was at home in district. And all those 10, 15, 20 people, and sometimes those were groups of people as well. So it wasn't one person, it was 5 people, and there were 20 groups of 5. So you could end up meeting with a lot of people. Their issues vary. They were not all coming in on the same topic, not all asking for the same thing. And it's my job to pay attention to all of those. I'll tell you what, that's hard. That's really, really hard when you talk to the first one and it's about education and you listen and it's compelling. But then they get up, walk out, and the next group walks in, and now they want to talk about gas mains. And then they get up and leave, and the next group wants to talk about, the Freedom of Information Act or something like that. I'm trying to pick random ideas so that you get a feel. So by the end of the day, if I was fed by those different groups data and logic and reason, I won't remember it, but I do remember stories. I can picture them to this day. I remember one woman came into me early on in my tenure as a representative and told me a story about her son who had gotten a traffic ticket for crossing a railroad. And her son was developmentally disabled. And he obviously was guilty of the charge. That was not the issue. But what the issue was that when he went to court to pay the bill, the ticket had said, this is a $50 ticket. And he was prepared to accept the consequences of that. But when he got to court, they said, yes, it is $50 plus $450 in fees and fines. And he had no way to pay that. His mother came to me and said, how is this fair? How is that the right thing to do? You know what I did? I said, it's not the right thing to do. And I picked up the phone and I called the state's attorney up there who I happened to know. And we were able to negotiate back down to the $50. But that's not how it's supposed to work. That's because she had the good idea to call me, and I happened to be a lawyer who knew how to make that phone call, but everybody doesn't have that. And so then I spent 4 years working on the concept of how do we change that. It did ultimately succeed 4 years later, where I did a major revamp of all our court fines and assessments, realigned them, reduced them, provided for waivers for people within 400% of the poverty level so that there would be a sliding scale. All of that happened because of that one person who came to my office one day early on. Major changes to the way our court system to this day now works and improvements. And all of that happened because of one person, one compelling story. And by the way, after I resolved that, I got a lovely note from that woman with a picture of her son. And I have that picture to this day. It's up here on my wall. And that reminds me that this job is about helping people, not about helping businesses. Now, although it doesn't hurt to help business, but this is about people to me. So that's just an example of a compelling story that affected me dramatically. And it was no more difficult than getting in front of me to do that. So let's talk about that aspect, about how do you get in front of your representative to talk about an issue, and what's the most effective way to do that. I will tell you, the most effective way is almost always in person. Now, that doesn't mean you have to drive to Springfield. That can be in their district office. And of course, COVID affected all of that. But as we seem to be coming out of COVID, I think those opportunities will return. Maybe you'll be masked, maybe they'll be masked, but I think you'll be able to do that. Because obviously in person, you will get the most time. And in district, you'll get more time than in Springfield, because you'll typically make an appointment, they'll be there, and it's just not as rapid fire as Springfield would be. It's also okay to want to go to Springfield and try to meet with them there. You'll have opportunities to catch them in the hallways, make appointments in their offices, catch them outside the doors to the Capitol or to the House chamber in the rotunda. I spend a lot of time there right now, by the way. Most of my days are spent standing outside that door hoping to catch representatives. But you'll have that opportunity. But understand, try to be clear and concise with your story and what you're asking for, because they'll need to know what your ask is. If you're just telling them a story and saying, I really wish you would work hard on crime, they'll say thank you, but then they won't know exactly what you're asking for. So instead, tell them, I really want you to work hard on crime, and this is the particular issue. I need you to fix this thing or the other thing. And you don't have to be scientific or a legislator or a lawyer to be able to say that. Describe it in real and normal terms. They have people to figure out what that means, where to find that in the statute. But tell your story, but also be mindful of the amount of time. Also, if you have the opportunity to leave something behind, maybe a single page sheet, certainly not more than a single page sheet, that summarizes your issue, that helps them remember. Remember how I told you that after 15 or 20 people, I'm starting to forget the first ones? Not if I have a sheet that you left behind. Now I know what your issue is and I can follow up on it. And I can give it to a staff person to say, let's do something about this. Let's work on this. So there are so many different ways to be able to do that. Now, I told you that the in-person meetings are the best, and they are, but that's not always the option. So second best, phone calls, Zooms. Zooms are really good. You know, I mean, I'm not happy about, I don't ever want to say anything good came out of the pandemic, but the functionality of being able to communicate at least face-to-face on a screen like we're doing right now is better than a phone call to me, because you get to show a little bit of your emotions and who you are that you can't convey on a phone. But either way, they're good, and the same stories can be told. So take the options that you have. And the representatives are accessible. You might have to be a little persistent, call a couple of times, but you can get there. And then the other thing is, don't afraid to be a presence. Don't be afraid to show up more than once on a Zoom, make multiple appointments. I had regulars, the people who would regularly contact me. And those people got my ear more readily because I know, oh, so-and-so is calling. Hey, how are you? I haven't talked to you in a few months, or whatever it would be. But I got to know my regulars. In fact, there were a couple of people when I ended up resigning, or not running for office, retiring is the better term, when I decided not to run again. The first two people I called, besides family, of course, were two of these regulars, people who I had learned just through the phone calls and meetings. And I said, I respect you guys more than most because you were always persistent, even when we didn't agree. They were respectful, they were kind, they were positive. I called them first. They were the first two people to know. So be persistent, but be pleasant. This is, you're not always going to agree, and that's okay. But politics is a game of addition, not subtraction. So find opportunities to be positive, even if the person doesn't agree with you on most things. Maybe you can wear them down, so to speak. Bill had also suggested the idea of, money. I'm not going to suggest money, although he's not wrong, but I would suggest volunteering. If you believe in the candidate, like you agree with them, or aligned with your views, offer to volunteer. Go knock on some doors. Go man a table. They'll never forget you if you do that. So find those opportunities if, in fact, they reflect your values. If they don't, then keep reaching out. Keep being part of that conversation. Keep Keep pushing them, but in a positive way. Negative stuff doesn't work very well. Maybe it does in campaigns, but it doesn't when you're trying to talk to your representative or any other. So last two ideas for communication. Again, we're going down in effectiveness. Letters, write letters. My worst, in my opinion, is emails. I know email is the easiest, but the reason it's easy is because everybody can do it. And so what happens is, especially if you follow a form, and I hope I'm not getting the league in trouble, but if you send me a form and 100 other people send me a form, I'm not reading it. I'll be able to see I'll read the first one, then I'll see the format's the same, and then I'll go, oh, checkbox, another person, oh, 100 people like that issue. Got it. That's not as compelling as one visit. That's not as compelling as a written letter, one I get in the mail, because those end up on my desk in front of me every day. And you know what the best letter is? A handwritten letter. And I know I just told you it's the hardest thing, right? It's hard to handwrite. Certainly for me it is. I don't have very good handwriting, but I will tell you, I read every handwritten letter, every single one, because they're so unique. You want to be unique. You want to get your story told. Find a way. Maybe you include a one-page typewritten letter, but you cover it with a handwritten note. They'll get paid attention to. These are all effective ways. And then in the end, remember, this is a slow process for change. Don't get discouraged that things don't happen right away. Incremental progress is a good thing. The most common phrase you'll hear when you're in the legislative arena is perfect is the enemy of the good. Don't let perfect block the good. Accept incremental progress. Work hard and then keep working. You'll get there. But I certainly appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. I'm just about out of time. I know we'll answer questions later, but I'm going to leave you with one last thing. And this is in the vein of stories and coincidence. Remember I told you a compelling story is more important than anything? When we were working on CJA, on the Clean Energy Jobs Act, which I think the acronym actually means something different now, but it's the same thing. We were debating the issue in the House and in the Senate. And as the leaders were talking about it, there's a coal-fired plant in Springfield on the far south side of Springfield. It exploded while we were talking. And there was a huge plume of black smoke that covered the skies of Springfield. It was okay. It was a malfunction. It wasn't like the greatest thing for the environment because it did release a lot of smoke, but in the end it was okay. But timing is everything. That was a coincidence, but it helped us. It helped our discussions because everybody got a visual, talk about a story. And that can happen too. Take advantage of those opportunities, those coincidences, and use them to your advantage, and always be positive. So thank you. And with that, I will end. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Steve. Some powerful examples. Finally, League member Hilary Denk will share advice from her perspective as District Director for Congressional Representative Bill Foster. By the way, Hilary was my former co-chair of Issues and Advocacy.
Good morning, everybody. So great to see you. I did scroll through all the names and I saw so many wonderful familiar faces and names and a lot of new folks too that I haven't met yet. So hopefully we will meet in person very soon. I am really pleased to be here with you. And for the last 4.5 years, I've had the honor to work for our local congressman in the 11th district, Congressman Bill Foster. And for about 25 years before that, I've been doing advocacy in many different ways. And it has been a real education to see what is effective on the federal level that really isn't as effective on the state level and vice versa. So it's a very different structure within the offices and within getting access directly with a member of Congress. As Steve was saying, your member of Congress is, represents about 750,000 people. So in terms of access and frequency of meetings and those kinds of things, it's just not as, you're not going to get as much contact, personal contact with your member of Congress like you will with a state legislator or county board member, or even as you get down to your village council members and so forth. So you really have to make those meetings when you have them count. I'm going to give you some tips about making those meetings count. And then I am also going to talk a little bit about just advocacy in general for those of you who maybe are beginners and are just dipping your toe into advocacy, or don't recognize that a lot of the things you probably already do is considered advocacy. So I'll turn to that after I give you some practical tips about meeting and working with your federal legislators. And I'm talking about a representative. Senators are also a whole other ball of wax, because frankly, senators who represent an entire state, finding a way to connect with them is even more challenging. And so if you want to have that personal meeting, because they're much rarer even on the Senate level. Your member of Congress spends maybe half their time in their district office. And frankly, that is the best place to connect with your member of Congress, if at all possible. You may be part of a group that's visiting Washington, D.C. and has made an appointment in Washington. But frankly, getting into those meetings is not easy. And when you do get into those meetings, you may get 15 minutes and you may not get the member of Congress, because often their schedule changes constantly, particularly in Washington, D.C. They don't have a lot of control over their schedule. They may suddenly have to go over to the Capitol for a vote or for a caucus meeting or something that was not on their schedule the day before. So you may end up speaking with a staff person. So in terms of where you're going to contact someplace to make an appointment, the best place to call, and I suggest calling, is their district office. And district office phone numbers are on every single congressman's website. So call that phone number, the office that's closest to you. And when you call, be really, really polite, because that scheduler or staff person who is on the call is your friend. Okay, that's the person that's going to help you understand when's a good time to visit. And they will help you get onto the schedule. One of the things they may ask you to do is send an email. Now, I know Steve said emails aren't the most effective. And really, those are like those mass emails that you get asked to sign on to by some organization you've on their listserv, right? Direct emails to the office, if they give you an email address, like here, I'm the staff person, send me an email with your name, who you are, why you want to visit, and they'll ask you a number of questions before they schedule an appointment for you. So that's the kind of email that's really important for you to make good use of. So call them, ask for the appointment, and then ask who's the person to email. And usually it's going to be the scheduler or some staff person in the district office. Again, different offices do things in different ways. So it's okay to ask the question, who's the best person for me to reach out to schedule this appointment? May I have their email address? Don't ask for the congressman's email address. You're never going to get it. There are many gatekeepers for a member of Congress. So they are very rarely going to be making themselves individually accessible to you, and they're not going to give you their email address. So on the district level, they're not going to give you the chief of staff's email address either. So you're going to get a scheduler or a staff assistant's email address, and then say, okay, and when you send that email, that's where you can start making your specific ask. So make it really clear in your email what you want. And that's also where you can attach that one-page document. If you already have it ready to go, attach that one-page document, have that bill number or letter sign on or whatever that specific ask is, put that in the email. Because when you have that meeting, it's great to have that information up front. Because what happens with that, if your office runs like ours does, that information is going to go to someone in DC beforehand. And they're going to see, have we already put our name on this bill? Why haven't we put our name on this bill? So you have some prep time before that. The office will have some preparation time before that meeting happens. So it's important to put that information in the email. You can actually ask over the phone too, if you don't have time for a meeting. You can say, or you don't think, the time is coming up for vote very quickly, or to get that person on as a co-sponsor. You can specifically ask over the phone, this is a bill I'd like the member of Congress to sign on to, or to support, or to vote for, because the vote's coming up next week. And you can say, I'm registering this, and with every contact, they're going to ask you for your name and your address and potentially your email so they can respond to you, and their phone number. Give them that information. Somebody contacts us and won't give us their name and their information, you're never going to hear back. And frankly, that's just somebody who's been wasting our time, frankly. I mean, when we get on a call, we're going to listen to everybody. We're going to be friendly to everybody, but that is not effective advocacy. That's not going to lead to any kind of change. So it's important to be ready to share that information. No one's going to take your information and share it publicly. We can't do that. Your email address isn't going to go anywhere beyond that office. So do not be concerned or worried that your information is going to be shared anywhere. And it just shows that you are a constituent too. It's a way for us to be, oh, okay, I can look up that address and know that person is our constituent. Sometimes we'll do that even while we're on the phone, because you may be calling about something and really you're not our constituent. And it's super confusing sometimes to know who your representative is. And as we head into 2022, for many of us, that's going to change. So that's a really important thing to recognize. They're not asking, they're specifically asking for that information for a purpose. Make sure you're a constituent and look for, if we're not, we can tell you who your member of Congress is and say, we do not meet with folks that are not our constituents. We get so many requests for meetings. And this is something that Steve also mentioned. He had his regulars. Now, there are offices that have their regulars too, people who call regularly. But if you are looking for an opportunity to meet with a member of Congress, you may get that opportunity once a year, maybe twice, if it's like a really hot issue. Again, because of their time constraints and all the different things they have to do every day, you cannot expect to meet with your congressman once a quarter or once a month. Your expectation is once a year, maybe twice a year. And that's an in-person meeting. We're also really doing a lot of virtual Zoom meetings with our constituents since we haven't been able to do in-person meetings. So you can ask for that. You can, and that's what we've been offering at this point, at least for the last 2 years. And we're looking to do in person soon. So again, there's that call, and you're going to be talking to, again, a staff person who may be very young, and right out of college. Often the folks sitting on those calls, sometimes they're even an intern. So just be really understanding if they don't, if they maybe ask questions that you think aren't relevant or aren't super, quick in understanding what your issue is, because these folks are learning phone skills sometimes. But they want to be helpful. They're there for a reason because they care about their community and want to connect, be a good representative for the member of Congress. So you get your appointment scheduled. You will have 20 minutes, sometimes a half an hour. So bring that one pager, bring maybe 2-3 people. Don't have like 20 people that you want to come in the door. They're going to ask when they schedule who's coming, what their names are. Provide as much information as you can up front. If you bring an extra person or two and they're a constituent, that's okay. But don't surprise them, the office with a bunch of folks that aren't expected. Because you're going to have just a short amount of time. In that meeting, you're going to have the member of Congress and a staff person. The staff person's job is to take notes and to watch the clock. Because most of the time a member of Congress has to get to something else right after they're done with you. So, and as Steve was saying, they're there to listen. But honestly, the staff person is really the most important person in the room. So again, recognize that that person in the room may look really young because most of the time they are. And do not be condescending to them like they're, because they're young looking. These are super smart, committed people that, are really going to be the next step to you getting, what you want in terms of change in your community and a piece of legislation. So the member of Congress may come in with some prep, probably will not, because they may not have time to look at notes or the memo before they come into the room. Be ready for that member of Congress to talk a lot too. So half your time may be listening to them. Some of them listen and don't say a word. Some of them like to share their own opinions or positions right up front. Some of them may offer advice, but be ready with your story. Have a couple personal stories and then your ask. Make the ask super clear. Again, we'd like you to co-sponsor this bill number. Have the bill number. This is something that happens all the time. Lots of bills have really catchy names or they're named after an individual, but people will come in and they don't know the bill number. That's what we need. So make sure you've got your name and the bill number. That is extremely helpful. The time you're in there, you're going to have 20 minutes to talk, maybe have a couple questions from the member of Congress, and then make that ask again, and then ask for a photo. This is something members of Congress really like. They want to take a photo with you. They want to show that they are meeting with their constituents. They'll ask if it's okay if we can take a photo, and then you can put it up on your social media. It's really important for them to see, and for your community to see that you're meeting with people that are representing you. So that's actually something that is kind of common now, and both sides like it. So don't forget to do that. When you're communicating, that emotion's important. That simple story is really important. Some members like those data points. They like to hear, the background. It kind of depends on the member of Congress. And so one of the things I forgot to tell you is before you go into that meeting, doing your research about that member of Congress is really helpful. You can also ask on the phone, when you make that appointment, simple questions like, do you know if this is an issue your office is following? Is this, one of the top priorities for this member of Congress? You can ask a few probing questions to kind of help you get a sense of, is this something really on their radar, or is this something that they've been working on for years? And you can check out, their blogs or their websites and see. Often there's very specific information on a member's website about their positions on the issue you're concerned about. So you may be already ready to go in knowing they usually don't support this kind of legislation. So it's important to kind of know that that's, one of the obstacles you may be coming up against is someone who's typically never supported this kind of legislation or usually doesn't. So be prepared to, answer questions that they may have, or persuade them why this might be the piece of legislation they want to take a chance on. And then follow up. Be sure and follow up with that email again, probably to that staff person that you initially sent the email to. A handwritten thank you note is always appreciated. And have that specific ask again, and always request a response. Do it during the meeting and do it during your follow-up, because they are supposed to respond to you. Okay, they need to tell you that they're going to take that position or they're not. Sometimes there's a reason why they haven't taken that position yet because of timing, or they're waiting for somebody else to, a caucus or a group to move forward, or they're looking for an amendment that's going to change their position on it. So, but always make that request and offer to be a resource on the topic when you send that follow-up email or letter. Share additional information. It's okay to do follow-up emails that might go to the staff person that's following that issue and just say, hey, I've got some new data on this that might change your mind. Please share this with with the staff person that's following this issue. I think that's always appreciated. And invite the member of Congress to your events. Follow up with those kinds of opportunities. They always want to get into the community and meet with people. So I think that's another wonderful way to do that follow up and build those relationships, because it is harder to build a relationship with the member of Congress than with your other local officials. I think I've used a lot of time already. So I just want to also make a big plug for the advocacy opportunities with League. I've had some of the best advocacy opportunities I've ever had by being a member of League. And that observing, bringing up observing is really important. I'm so glad that was brought up, because that's honestly where you get the head start on an issue that's coming down the line, is through observing. So that's great. And when you're just generally getting involved with advocacy, pick one issue, maybe two, that you're really excited about, and get involved in those. Join groups, listen to seminars, and learn about the legislation that you're interested in. And that's how I've gotten really involved on graduated rate income tax and consolidation of governmental entities, the ERA amendment, a lot of really exciting, interesting issues. Get involved with legislative visits, lobby day. If you go to the US convention, go on that lobbying experience to meet your members of Congress. Come to these, briefing. I'm so excited to see so many here at the issues briefings. Go to the public events that your members of Congress or any of your legislators are holding if you can, because that's another opportunity to talk to them or talk to their staff members. Ask for their business cards. If you see a staff member there, ask for their business card, because that's how you get that in as well. And I think one of the most exciting things that I've done is, sometimes your legislators don't respond to you. Okay. You're going to have members of Congress that say, I don't have time for a visit. And they don't make themselves accessible to their members of the public. And frankly, that has had an impact. The fact that they haven't made themselves available to their constituents actually is a form of advocacy. Get them on the record on topics. And then if they're not going to get on the record, then they're not a good public servant. So the greatest form of advocacy you have is your vote. So if your member of Congress or your public official isn't being responsive, isn't listening to you, and isn't meeting with you, then use your vote and find a new leader. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all four of you. I think we've learned a lot. One question that I have, I know that Steve and Hilary both mentioned that there are differences between advocating at the state and national level, and you mentioned some of them, but I was wondering, could you just kind of bring those together for us and say, what do you see as the major differences between advocacy at the state and federal levels?
So I can start. I mean, one of the big things that you have to realize is on the federal level, when you're advocating to your member of Congress on a piece of federal legislation, you really have to bring it home to Illinois or your district. So, these are big pieces of legislation. Often they're going to have disparate impacts on different parts of the country. So if it's something you don't want them to vote for and you see a lot of support, you need to really point out why this is not a good thing to happen for Illinois or for your district, or why it is. So if you have that information or you have that to share, that's really important with your member of Congress on, a federal legislation. Also, I didn't say this, but don't come to us with it has to be a federal issue that you come to us about. So there is often that gatekeeping that happens at the top too, is where someone might come to us about an issue and we're like, we don't do anything about FOID cards. We don't do anything about your driver's license. Like, these are state issues. So we often are educating people about, whether this is a state or federal issue or something we could actually help with. So that's the other part is, if you can do that research up front to understand where your issue is, we're happy to help people understand where their issue falls. But having that specific information about your district or your state is really helpful.
And I think that's wonderful. And by the way, Hilary's suggestion about taking a picture with the representative and posting it on social media is brilliant, and absolutely right. So I'd encourage you to follow that advice. So a little bit of volunteer work, actually a lot of bit of volunteer work I do is on the Equal Rights Amendment at the national level. But there, I'm just a person fighting for a cause I believe in, nothing more. I'm not a registered lobbyist in DC, and I wouldn't know how to do it. But in the realm of managing expectations, the difference is I never expect to talk with an elected. I expect to talk and work with staff, and they are wonderful. And I think that they are typically pretty young, but they're pretty brilliant. They're coming from, great educations, and they are motivated. And I think they become the influencer, right? So if I can convince them, maybe that voice gets transferred up. So I think that the big difference for me is at the state level, you can expect to interact directly and regularly. At the federal level, my experience has been it's best to focus on the staff. So.
The other thing on that is you have to recognize, this happens on the state level too. The number of issues and the number of pieces of legislation they're looking at is immense. And so recognizing who maybe in the Illinois delegation is really focusing on your issue, even if you're outside their district, sometimes if you can find folks that are within their district, because that legislator, that's really their issue area, and that's what they're focusing on, you might have more of an impact. Although honestly, things come into our office that, it's a compelling constituent concern, and it goes over the top of, financial services or science stuff that the congressman is involved with. So it's it kind of depends on the topic, but I think that's another way maybe to get to the person that might have more of an impact.
Thank you. Now Rosemary has a number of questions that have been submitted.
Yes, and there are quite a few, and we're running out of time. But this one I wanted to hit especially importantly for Bill, and Hilary mentioned it too. There's a little confusion over the term observer, because Bill was saying he was an observer at this caucus. And so just so everybody knows, a league observer that goes to a public meeting, like a school board meeting or a village board, indeed, that observer does not speak, and only a representative of your league, when approved by your board, would make a public statement. But the group that Bill was, it really wasn't as a little O observer, more like an invited guest. Bill, could you just kind of clarify what kind of a group that was?
What kind of group that was?
Yeah. I mean, just it wasn't
it's huge.
official...
It's a coalition of many groups, and within it, many more groups. Each one of them different. It's like, what is your favorite class from?
All right.
Are these
so
different?
It wasn't a governmental body, is what I'm saying.
No, it was not a governmental body, but there was that 10 seconds of silence. My mind was going, wait a minute, I got in here as a League of Women Voters observer. Am I supposed to talk or not talk? And I decided, well, I'm going to, do first and ask forgiveness later. I couldn't let the moment go. This was like, I thought it was kind of a key thing. But I was literally going, I'm not supposed to talk, or am I? And I go, which room am I in? Which room am I in? Which head am I got on today? And I wasn't really clear. I just went with my instincts and hope I blundered and did something good instead of bad.
And that's wonderful. And that's just so people know, that was a little observer with a little O, or you could say a guest, not an official league observer at a
Yeah. I started as an observer, and then I spent more time at it, and then people got to know who I was, and I didn't say anything really stupid or scare anybody, and eventually I got to be more involved than an observer.
So I just wanted to clarify that for the audience, that that's not the same as observing a governmental body. All right, well, we have quite a few. We'll start, Susan, Craig had asked, do you need a budget for these efforts to make your voice heard? And do groups pay lobbyists for advice? Are there other costs? Anyone can answer that.
I can answer at my level. So it just depends on your issue and your organization. One of you on one issue, it doesn't cost you anything other than your time. So don't feel like you have to organize a massive campaign just to talk with your representative or your senator at the at the state level about something. So no, it doesn't. If you've got a campaign like CJA, yeah, that costs a lot of money and a lot of volunteer hours and a lot of expertise and time. And then they did hire lobbyists, such as myself and my firm. But that's it. Those are probably the two extremes, in my opinion.
Okay. Susan wants to know for either one of the bills, what did you say to the local people who signed on to IMEA? And I don't know what that is, so maybe you can explain that too. In other words, people who have significant skin in the game, especially since the long-term economics have changed.
Want to take it, Bill?
So IMEA is the Illinois Municipal something or other. Anyway, it's an organization of people who, muni utilities that have banded together and act as a single purchasing group, basically. So what we said to people who voted to invest in Prairie State and other muni coal and gas plants was, times have changed. You made a decision back then based on, the best information available, and it may not have turned out to be the best decision, but it's time to move on. You need to look at the current situation and the current damage that's being done. It's no longer debatable. It's quite obvious as to the amount of harm. And here's an opportunity you may not have, that may not come again. This may be your last and best opportunity to reverse what has been a disastrous course.
Okay, thank you. Shall I go on, Jean, or do you have more questions, or shall I go on with mine?
Just one point that came up. Bill Koehl was a liaison from the state for the coalition, and so that makes a difference. Another thing that I think people need to be aware of is that local presidents are the ones who can speak on behalf of their leagues to state or federal representatives, but first they have to get permission from issues and advocacy at the state level or the National League in order to contact and speak on behalf of local leagues directly. So yeah, I think we have time for one more question.
All right. Well, here's one I think that comes up from Erica. She's directing it to Steve, but I think also Hilary, but maybe all of you. How do league members and interested citizens who want to speak to a legislator that is not their own representative, but is critical to the issue they are advocating for, get in front of that legislator? I found it very difficult to get a phone call returned or appointment set up if I'm not their constituent.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good question and a fair one. You will be most effective with your own representative because that's who they work for, so to speak. What I would suggest is if you could team up with somebody in that district, that would be highly effective. So maybe you have the subject matter expertise that this person needs to hear, but they're out of your district. Find someone who is in the district, even if it's just a friend of yours. And maybe you tell them, you don't have to say a word. I just need you to get me entrance to the rep or to the senator. That'd probably be the most effective. I would say just be persistent, but it sounds like you have been and didn't have much success with that. So that would definitely be my suggestion.
Yeah, I think that the constituent piece is really important. If you're part of like a statewide organization, even when that happens, like we have these, DC fly-ins from groups, they specifically invite constituents from our district. Like they'll identify people who connect with that organization that are from our district because they know that's really how they get in the door. So if it's a decider on a topic or they won't sign on yet, the best thing is to build those coalitions within the community where that member lives and educate them, kind of like, the folks did on CJA. You get those people from within the community that they live in, because that's who they care about. They care about their own voters the most.
Thank you very much to our panelists for sharing your insights with us today. And thank you to our league members and friends of the league for staying informed and engaged in advocacy. Your voice makes a difference. Now, I need to tell you this year, local leagues, because of the condensed General Assembly schedule, your local league will be invited to lobby when you schedule legislative interviews. We will not be having a separate lobby day. If you would like more information about these topics, please look at the resources posted on the State League's website, issues briefing pages. And we will be submitting your unanswered questions and try to get back to you with answers. Now, please stick around a couple minutes, complete a brief poll before you take your break, and then join us at 10:30 for our second plenary, which will feature Peter Adams from the News Literacy Project. His organization has done extensive work on identifying and combating misinformation. Thank you.